The election campaign has entered its final week, and the promises and the warnings from the party leaders are piling up. They were out on the stump this morning trying to capture the votes of the still undecided.
Labour will do what they do every single time, and that is raise your taxes.
The choice is stark. 14 years we've had of chaos, of division, of failure.
Also this lunchtime in France, the far right takes the lead in the first round of parliamentary elections. A new energy price cap comes in today, so your bill will come down, but not for long. And the young charity fundraisers who missed the King's garden party, so had tea with the Queen instead.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Geraint Vincent.
Good afternoon. Not long to go now. There are just 3 days left in this election campaign, and the party leaders are honing their messages and delivering dire warnings about what will happen if their opponents win. The Prime Minister urged voters this morning not to give Labour a blank cheque on July the 4th, while Labour told them to avoid waking up on July the 5th to what they called 5 more years of chaos under a Tory government. The Liberal Democrat leader, meanwhile, appealed to people to vote tactically. A vote for them, he said, is a vote to get rid of the Conservatives. With the latest, here's Shihab Khan.
It all flies by all too fast during a general election campaign. We are now into the final week of it. Still significantly behind in the polls, Rishi Sunak today donned his high-vis jacket in Staffordshire, where he was adamant he hadn't given up.
I'm fighting hard for every vote. I don't take a single place or person for granted. But I don't want Britain to sleepwalk into the danger of what an unchecked Labour government with a supermajority would mean. And that means handing Labour a blank cheque.
But those warnings of a supermajority may have worked too well. There are reports some of his rivals, who might be looking to replace him as Tory leader if he loses, have already bought website pages.
Have some of your colleagues already resigned themselves to defeat?
Well, the point that I have made, and other people have to speak for themselves, the point that I have made is between now and the close of polls, we should all be relentlessly focused on maximising the number of Conservative MPs that return, getting ourselves elected and our colleagues elected. That's what I'm focused on. I have no doubt that's what the Prime Minister has focused on. That's what we should all be focused on.
Labour say they aren't taking anything for granted. And while the Labour leader was out in Hertfordshire today, he was insistent he's ready to serve.
The country is broken. Almost nothing is working better than it was when the Tories started. Is it possible to bring around the change that we offer? Yes, it is. We have that determination, that intention. And in 5 years' time, we will be able to look back and say, you are truly better off.
With only a few days left before we go to the polls, both leaders are now in their final moments of convincing us to vote for them. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, let's get the latest from elsewhere on the campaign trail now. In a moment, Chloe Keedy, who's following the Liberal Democrats. But first to our Scotland correspondent, Peter Smith, who's in Glasgow. Peter, the issues that the SNP is campaigning on there are markedly different to those featuring elsewhere in the UK, aren't they?
That's right, Geraint. We've heard a lot of talk, particularly between Conservatives and Labour, about how they're going to reduce migration, tackle immigration. Well, in Scotland, the SNP are saying they want more migration here, particularly because this nation has a problem with an ageing workforce and a declining working age population. There was talk over the weekend that there could be something like a kind of Scotland work visa programme. Now, I've approached Labour about this, and what they're telling me is that this would not be devolved to Scotland, but they could be looking, there's a migration advisory committee, could be looking at separate parts of the nations of the UK, examining it on a case-by-case basis, so tailored for Scotland's working needs. On that basis, the SNP are saying they want this devolved. They want devolved powers to increase migration and tackle the declining workforce, working age population that we have, particularly in areas like the Highlands. On the issue of migration, another marked difference is that we've not really seen the Farage effect up here. Reform are making modest progress in the polls, and on those polls, we're looking at about a quarter of the seats are still what the pollsters regard as too close to call. So everything is still to play for. There's a real contest here in Scotland.
Well, we are in Wokingham, where Ed Davey is taking part, I don't know if you can see him behind me, in a Zumba class this lunchtime, as if he hasn't already had enough excitement for one day. He got his the last week of his campaign quite literally off to a flying start by doing a bungee jump in Eastbourne this morning. And as we know, this is all part of the Liberal Democrats' strategy to try and win votes. I think there are still real questions over how well that strategy is working. You know, we've been on the road with Sir Ed Davey for the past 5 weeks. Every time I post about one of these stunts, I get a real mixed reaction. Some people who say they think it's great that he's not taking himself too seriously, and others who say they think he should be taking himself more seriously and focusing speaking more about policies. It does feel a little bit incongruous that we've watched him do a bungee jump and now Zumba today, but the policy the party is pushing out today is one about their support, Ed Davey and the party's support for bereaved families. If you talk to the campaign strategists, as I have been doing today, they will tell you that they are happy with how the campaign is going. They point to polls that show Ed Davey's popularity is up, and they say they're feeling pretty confident. We'll find out in 3 days' time if they're right to be.
Oh, all right, Chloe and the Zumba class and Peter in Glasgow, many thanks. And for a handy guide to all the party's main policies, plus key takeaways from their manifestos, we have a special section on our website. You'll find it all at itv.com/news. In France, meanwhile, elections are generally a more complicated business than they are here. The first round of voting in the parliamentary elections, which were called by President Macron just 3 weeks ago, took place over the weekend, and they've already established a new political reality. The far-right party, National Rally, won a third of the vote, and parties of the centre and left are now working out how to limit its progress in the second round of voting this Sunday. Well, live now to our Europe editor, James Mates, who's in northern France. Are they going to succeed, James?
Well, they won't succeed in preventing them scoring a big win next weekend, I'm pretty sure of that. But will they succeed in stopping them getting an absolute majority in the National Assembly? Well, yes, they might, but that doesn't necessarily make the situation any better, particularly for President Macron, because Marine Le Pen and the leadership of her party, who are meeting this morning in Paris, they are saying that they've taken a decision that if they don't get an absolute majority next Sunday, they will refuse to try and form a coalition government, and they will not take the job of Prime Minister. Now, that could make things even messier, because trying to form a coalition and some form of coherent government from all the other parties, from the far left to the centre right, would be monumentally messy, possibly even impossible. So President Macron's strategy of, look, let's call an election. If the far right win it, well, they'll make a right mess of things, and that'll do them a grave disservice. The attitude here is that he's the one who's made a mess of things. He's being roundly blamed for the chaos that France is currently in. One normally sympathetic newspaper this morning talked about him having called this election through spiteful narcissism, and detailed how his plan to destroy the centre-right and centre-left parties with his own centrist party has worked rather too well, because now that all three of them have collapsed, and all we're left with is far left and far right.
OK, James Mates, many thanks. Some other news this lunchtime, and a former head teacher has been jailed over the abuse of 4 girls. A judge described Neil Foden as domineering, who hid his sexual obsession with teenagers. The 66-year-old was convicted in May and will serve 17 years behind bars. Police have called off their search for a teenager missing after going swimming in the River Mersey with friends. The 14-year-old boy was in the water at Crosby Beach yesterday evening when he got separated from the group. Emergency services, including the Coast Guard, took part in the search. And police investigating a funeral directors in Hull are visiting 163 affected families. An inquiry began after concerns about relatives being given the wrong ashes. 2 people have been arrested as part of the investigation. Next this lunchtime, union workers have halted their planned strike at the steel giant Tata. Unite were due to walk out next week in a row over the company's plans to close 2 blast furnaces at Port Talbot. But that prompted a threat from bosses to bring forward their planned shutdown of operations. Our Wales reporter, Rhys Williams, is there for us this lunchtime. Rhys, welcome news there for the workers?
Yes, absolutely. You know, the unions, both of the other unions who represent workers here, Community and GMB, have welcomed this decision by Unite. They weren't a part of this proposed strike planned for next week. And of course, Tata had said that they would have to close both of the blast furnaces within days if that went ahead, because they couldn't guarantee the safety of the operations there. Now, it's all part, of course, of a plan that Tata had already laid out to close one of the blast furnaces within days, possibly sometime within the next week. Well, the second and final blast furnace would be closed by September. Now, that should be the plan that Tata revert to now, although we're waiting for confirmation of that. This is part of a big investment the UK government has made, £500 million, to allow Tata Steel to build an electric arc furnace to replace the 2 blast furnaces here. Now, electric arc furnaces are far greener, far less carbon intensive, but they're also far less labour intensive than blast furnaces. And that would lead to the loss of around 2,800 jobs here in Port Talbot. So while this is welcome news today, of course, it doesn't change the fundamentals of what's in store here, which is that both blast furnaces will close within the next few months.
OK, Rhys, many thanks. Still ahead on the lunchtime news.
Where were you for the Jude Bellingham 95th minute winner? I was there! Jude Bellingham!
England keep their Euro dreams alive after that stunning strike against Slovakia. And tea for 2, the Queen hosts a pair of young fundraisers after they missed a garden party with the King. But first, a new energy price cap comes into effect today, with households in England, Wales and Scotland set to benefit from a 7% drop in bills. Regulator Ofgem has lowered its price limit in response to wholesale prices falling. The average household will pay £1,568 a year for its gas and electricity bills. That's down from £1,690 and is around £500 less than this time last year. But the cap only applies until October, when bills are expected to go up again. Well, our consumer editor, Chris Choi, is here. Chris, why is this decrease only temporary?
Yeah, enjoy it while you can. It's not going to last very long. The experts are predicting that this price cap will bounce up again in October, taking the average bill to about £1,723. That's another 10% rise from today, about £155 on a typical bill, and that those higher prices from October will be around for, say, the first half of 2025.
Should people be looking to switch to a fixed deal now then?
Now, you probably remember the days we were all obsessed by fixing and switching. Yeah. It all kind of fell off a cliff in 2022. All those deals disappeared. They are creeping back onto the market. It can be quite complicated. There are a couple of basic principles. What you need to be doing if you are thinking about fixing, and 85% of us, by the way, aren't at the moment, but if you're thinking about it, then you're looking for a deal that's around about this price cap level. It might be a little bit higher, because we know this is going to drift up. You don't want to be fixing for longer than a year, according to most experts, because it gets harder to predict the further out that we are. And look for exit fees, because if they're high and expensive, it's going to limit your flexibility in the future.
I've got one of those electric meters now, which tells me how much I'm using all the time. But if you haven't got one of a smart meter, that's what I was asking. But should I say, if you haven't got one of them, should you take a meter reading now?
If this is one of those bits of consumer advice that seems to have grabbed everybody's attention. After the football yesterday, there were people in the pub dashing home to do a meter reading. I mean, it is sensible advice, because it means that there's less chance of any dispute with your energy supplier about how many units you had before or after this change. Obviously, if you've got a smart meter, you don't need to worry. If you're already on a fix, you don't need to worry. But otherwise, it is good, sensible advice. But there's no mad rush. Do it in the next few days. It'll still help if there is any kind of dispute.
All right, Chris, many thanks. In other news, the Caribbean is bracing for the arrival of a dangerous hurricane expected to make landfall within hours. Flights to the region have been cancelled, and island communities are expecting violent winds and flash flooding. Storm Beryl's arrival marks an exceptional start to the Atlantic hurricane season. Here, 3 horses from the Household Cavalry Regiment have broken free and run loose through central London. It's the second such incident since April. This time it's thought a horse was spooked by a London bus. The Home Secretary has described a migrant boat artwork by Banksy at Glastonbury Festival this weekend as vile and not funny. The small boat first appeared during the Idol set on Friday. And Royal Mail are asking dog owners to take extra care to protect postal workers. After attacks increased over the past year, there were more than 2,000 dog attacks last year, equivalent to 42 every week, with some causing permanent injuries to its workers. Tennis now, and it's the first day of Wimbledon in what's been called the most open tournament in decades. But already a Brit is out, and there are serious doubts about whether two-time champion Sir Andy Murray will be fit enough for his singles match tomorrow. Well, our reporter Martha Fairley is there. Martha, such a staple of the British summer, of course. How are things looking there?
Well, day one at Wimbledon and the skies over SW19 have remained stubbornly overcast today, but the anticipation is as great as ever, with tens of thousands of people flocking here. There have, of course, been the traditional queues with the most dedicated of fans camping over the weekend to try and secure a ticket. British fans are ever hopeful that with 19 British singles players this year, 2024 could produce a homegrown champion. But they're also hopeful they might see, for one last time, Andy Murray play here.
Hopefully he's got one last hurrah in him. We're keeping our fingers crossed.
I think he's really hard working and he really wants to come.
Hopefully he's got one more in him, but not sure.
Maybe, yeah, I think so, unfortunately.
I hope not.
He's a really great player.
He's wonderful, yeah.
He's given us some really good memories, so I think it's about time for him to perhaps just, take time off and enjoy.
But there has already been one British casualty, Heather Watson, who was on court at 11 o'clock against Belgium's Greet Minnen. She was knocked out 7-5, 6-4. On centre court, last year's men's winner, Carlos Alcaraz, is starting his match against Mark Lyle. And following them this afternoon is Emma Raducanu. She had been drawn against the 22nd seed, Ekaterina Alexandrova, but the Russian has pulled out with illness. So now Raducanu is facing Mexican Renata Zarazua. But in the men's singles, the big question is really whether Andy Murray will make it to his opening match tomorrow. He had to pull out of Queen's with a back problem, had an operation on a spinal cyst last weekend, which has caused weakness in his leg. He's due to make a decision this evening about whether he'll play. Everyone's now just waiting to find out if Wimbledon will be his final hurrah.
OK, thank you very much, Martha. Staying with sport and to the stunning turnaround for England in last night's match against Slovakia. Fans had already begun leaving the stadium when Jude Bellingham provided a surprise 96th-minute equaliser. That goal and an extra-time header by Harry Kane put the Three Lions through to the Euros quarter-finals, as Graham Stothart reports.
They may have been singing after the final whistle blew, but for the first 90 minutes, most fans could only sit in agonised silence. Then, in extra time, a game many thought they'd want to forget turned into one it'll be impossible not to remember.
We left and then we went back because they scored.
I can't put it into words.
That's just wow.
Absolutely insane.
Probably the best thing I've ever seen in my life.
Despite that, it was a lacklustre first 90. A team packed with talent still so timid.
Faltering England are on the back foot again.
A goal down and no changes at half-time. Then, with just seconds to spare, that moment.
Here's the overhead kick from Bellingham!
Bellingham's acrobatics shook the stadium and Slovakian confidence. Next, a minute into overtime and classic Kane. Right place, right time. 2 goals which will live long in the memory.
Where were you for the Jude Bellingham 95th minute winner? I was there!
So how does the man himself feel about that moment?
Depends how we're looking in 2 weeks. You know, if it ends up being one that helps the team lift the cup, then it'll be right up there. But until then, we'll see.
This wasn't the convincing win England wanted. Southgate for much of the game came in for heavy criticism, but still praised his team.
Yeah, they've shown the character that they have. That's been questioned quite a bit, but there's some character in there.
In the next game, they'll face tougher competition. Switzerland. England through to the quarter-finals, having put their fans through the ringer. Graham Stothard, ITV News.
And finally, we have told you the story of 9-year-old Tony Hudgell before on this programme. He's the little boy who had to have both his legs amputated. His charity fundraising work since has earned him an invitation to Buckingham Palace, but he was stopped from attending the garden party with the King after getting stuck in traffic. So the Queen stepped in and made some special arrangements. Sally Bidoff reports.
Really nice to get you here today. We thought we'd give you a special garden party.
It's not every day that one gets invited by the Queen to have tea at Buckingham Palace. But Tony Hudgell and Lila O'Donovan are extraordinary children. Tony suffered catastrophic injuries at the hands of his birth parents when he was a baby. But with the support of the family who adopted him, he's raised £2 million for a London children's hospital. Lila O'Donovan, who has a brain tumour, has raised awareness of the condition and helped lots of other children through their treatment too. Both missed the original party for very different reasons.
I was supposed to go to a garden party, but we got stuck in traffic. My mum put out a tweet. The Queen's team said, "So sad that you didn't make the garden party today." We found out that I was having a private one with another person called Lila.
We couldn't come to the garden party last month because I was in hospital. We sat around the table and we just chatted for a bit. We had some little cookies, some sandwiches and tea.
For Tony, though, it was extra special as he became the youngest ever recipient of the British Empire Medal, an honour bestowed for his charity work.
The Queen gave me my BEM today. Very happy.
A day to remember for two remarkable children enjoying the full royal treatment. Sally Bidoff, ITV News.
And that is it this lunchtime. Mary will be here with the evening news at the later time of 7:45 tonight after tonight's football. The news where you are is next. Goodbye for now.